So, you just downloaded Warframe, or maybe you've been playing for a while now, but you've decided it's finally time someone tell you just what the flying space ninjas is going on. So here's the history of Warframe in 7 minutes. Before I get started, I want to mention that the Warframe universe is full of unreliable narrators, plot twists, and misleads. This video is about the broader points of the story leading up to the player's beginning of the game. It is my intention to avoid spoilers, so there are some details that are intentionally omitted. That being said, please be considerate and avoid spoilers in the comments. Thank you. We still don't know much about the time leading up to the Orokin era. It is unclear how much the Warframe universe draws from the real world and real-world events, but it is heavily implied that there are some such similarities prior to the Orokin era. That's really about all we know for now. The Oran Empire was the seat of power in the Origin system before the collapse. They were technologically advanced even beyond the present-day standards. They were also masters of biological and material synthesis, and their society operated on a harsh class system. They had complete dominion over the Origin system and were oppressive and cruel to common people. Only members of high society were even considered to be true Orokin. They created clone slaves called the Grineer to perform the hard and often dangerous manual labor required for their technological masterpieces. It is also during this era that a man named Granum Parvos would form the merchant cult called the Corpus in an attempt to rise above oppressive Orokin society. Sometime during the Orokin era, the Orokin discovered the system of Tau located in the Void. The system was harsh and uninhabitable, as well as being located in another dimension. The Void, as it is called in the Warframe universe, refers not to the void of space, but to an extra-dimensional plane where the laws of physics and time are written differently. In spite of what sounds like some pretty profound deal-breakers, the Origin system was becoming overpopulated, and the Orokin sought a solution.
Immortal as we are, we die with the sun. That's where I come in.
An Orokin researcher by the name of Albrecht Entrati discovered that the Void could be traversed and pioneers the development of Void Jump technology. A colony ship known as the Zaramon 10-0 is tasked with terraforming and populating the newfound system. Unfortunately, the Zaramon vanished into the Void upon leaving Saturn, and re-emerges several years later with most of the crew dead. The only survivors were the children, whom had been changed by the Void and would be henceforth referred to as Tenno. The Tenno were deemed dangerous by the Orokin because of the strange powers they had obtained from their time in the Void. Even though the ship had been lost adrift for several years, none of the children had aged a day. An elite scholar by the name of Margulis would ultimately save the Tenno. She took them in as her foster children, protected them from other Orokin elites, and was largely responsible for their rehabilitation. She guided the Tenno through the trauma they had suffered on the Zaramon and helped reintegrate them into Orokin society. With the failure of the Zaramon, the Orokin knew they needed a new means of reaching Tau, so they developed a series of robotic terraforming machines to build a path of solar rails through the Void. When the first Orokin ships tried to use the solar rails, they were destroyed in transit. The Void had changed these terraforming machines too, and had given them sentience, becoming the aptly named Sentient. In their budding awareness, they decided they would rather keep their newfound home rather than surrender it to the Orokin, who had already caused so much damage to the Origin system, and so the Old War began. The scales of war tipped quickly against the Orokin. They had been caught off guard, and the weapons and methods of war they used were ill-suited for fighting these strange void-touched machines. As the war raged on, the Orokin militarized the Grineer to slow the sentient advance. When that failed, they began developing various strains of techno-organic pathogens to deploy against their enemy. The sentient proved immune to this infestation, and so the Orokin grew even more desperate. They turned to Margulis, demanding that she force the Tenno to use their void powers to help them fight the sentients. Margulis simply refused. Though she had committed no real discernible crime, Margulis was convicted of committing apostasy and was executed by Jadelight. The Orokin then found a handler for the Tenno they called the Lotus. The Orokin ordered the Lotus to train the Tenno in the use of their void powers as well as the use of warframes. She guided, taught, and cared for the Tenno throughout the Old War, which dragged on for several hundred years. The war finally comes to an end when the sentient leader Hunhao is defeated in a climactic final battle. Without a leader, the sentient forces were finally broken and forced to retreat back to Tau. The war had been costly on both sides, and military might was effectively spent. But with the sentient in full retreat, the Orokin saw this as a victory. The Orokin leaders gathered in the outer terminus of Pluto to celebrate their hard-fought victory. Seeking revenge for the murder of Margulis, and under the guidance of the Lotus, the Tenno slaughter the Orokin leaders on Pluto. With all of the Orokin leadership either dead or missing, the Lotus and the Tenno destroyed the remnant sentient forces in the system. With the origin system secured, the Lotus and the Tenno disappeared into hiding and became something of a legend during the years of the collapse. The origin system saw most of the fighting during the war. Its once pristine cities and space stations now lied in ruins. The abandoned Orokin research vessels spread infestation outbreaks across the galaxy, while Corpus and Grineer struggled to claim the power of the Orokin for themselves. The Corpus had lost their leader and would never agree on a new one, breaking into splinter factions governed by a bickering board. Most of the Grineer would be unified by the Twin Queens, but some would rebel, refusing the old ways of the Orokin. While the competing forces of the Corpus and the Grineer remain the most prominent in the galaxy, various syndicates have emerged that constantly fight for influence. And this is where you come in. This is where your Warframe adventure begins. Hopefully you now have a better idea of who and what you're fighting and why. I plan on making more lore videos in the future, so please let me know what you'd like to know more about in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.